Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Somebody is hearing me, that's good. Thank you. They can hear me now. It's working, but you have to be quite close to me. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure and a privilege to welcome you to the translation University and to the symposium that we are holding today as part of the Higher Education Academy and the Art and the Research Council, which is a facility I would like to welcome more specifically all the consultants who come from the sort of regions of the world who listen to paper. And I would like to welcome more specifically to sunny London today and to direct your attention to drinks that are at the back of the room. There's a few things at the back of the room that you can know about. Like drinks, and make sure you have plenty to drink. Otherwise, people can get dehydrated because it's important. Don't do that, please, because keep the air conditioning working. We can see you here, a few items of housekeeping to start with, which you have to do. One is fire exits. There's always this fear in England of fire. So please don't follow the arrows here. There's only two exits in the room. One is at the back, one is at the front of the room. So please use the exit which is closest to you in case you hear the fire alarm. The other one is the toilets, which are past the reception desk. Make sure you ask the ambassadors where it is. And past the toilet, there's a cafeteria with snacks and coffee. If you feel you need more coffee, it would be provided in our coffee space. But if you need more drinks, more coffee, please use the cafeteria. Nice seat here where you can have a chat with us if you need. All the other information you need should be in your caps. But if you need anything else, because any query that you have, we have a nice team of helpers ready to help. The symposium organizers, Subida by Hampshire, and yes, and Piero Toto of the organizing committee, the lecturers from translation, yes, thank you. All the lecturers from the department and the students' ambassadors. You will have seen from the programs that there are parallel sessions at this afternoon, 3 parallel sessions. 3 lists are on one of the tables at the back. There's limited capacity in each room, so please make sure you put your name down against the parallel session that you want to attend. There's also on the table a certificate of attendance list for those who require one. Please put your name down, and hopefully the certificate will be ready later on this evening for you to collect from the ambassadors. If you are one of the technologically minded people, and you would like to tweet about the event today, please use our hashtag DigiTrans14, and if you want to watch, or some of your colleagues want to watch who can come today and want to watch the presentations, The symposium will be web streamed on our YouTube channel, which is this channel. So it seems that we are on camera, and I'm being asked to smile, which I haven't done so far. So everybody smile, you're on camera. Right. I would like now to call Professor John Gabriel, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, where we belong, who is going to formally open the symposium. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like now to call Dr. Filippo Nereo from the Higher Education Academy for a few words about the symposium. Phil, you were talking about opportunities to support us. Does that translate into money? Potentially, yes. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you. Now I'd like to call Professor Charles Forsyth from the HRC, who will say a few words about translating technology. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, from me again, a warm welcome to everyone, and I think we're about to start with the formal presentations. I would like to call Zubida, who is going to introduce our first speaker this morning. Thank you very much.
Without any further ado, because I'm keeping my eye on the watch every single second, basically. What I would like to do is simply very quickly introduce you to our first speaker, Professor Anthony Pym, who's going to tell us quite a few things about the technology, its place today in the area of translation. I'm going to introduce you, Anthony, if I may, very quickly. Anthony Pym is a Professor of Relation and Intercultural Studies at the Rovira in the Virgili University in Tarragona, Spain. Excuse my pronunciation. Anthony is also President of the European Society for Translation Studies, a Fellow of the Catalan Institution for Research and Advanced Studies, and also a visiting researcher at the Monterey Institute. I won't say any more, but I'm sure that Anthony would be happy to take the floor. Anthony, if you would like. Thank you very much indeed.
Many thanks for the introduction. My thanks to the London Met, and especially, well, and additionally, to the Arts and Humanities Research Trust for this long-term project translating cultures, with which I've been involved in recent months in excellent events, almost as excellent as the one coming up here. My fellow speakers today know a lot more about current translation technology than I do. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm merely going to try to set the scene for you, for a reflection on what technology is and what it means for communication. Bear with me, if you will. Imagine we are in 12th century Hispania. Spain doesn't exist yet. Hispania is this Roman territory recently reconquered from Islamic forces who are still hanging about in the south. It's hot, it's dry. You, though, we are scholars. We've been trained in cathedral schools for Latin. Pretty rum Latin, different in different countries all over Europe, but basically Latin altogether. And we can speak this language with each other, with regional variants. But we're here in Hispania looking for not quite the beach, not quite the sun and the tourism. We're looking for knowledge. People have told us that the Almagest, the greatest treatise, Ptolemy's Secrets of the Heavens, is available in Arabic somewhere. Aristotle is there somewhere, telling us about geography and the heavens again. Galen is there, telling us the secrets of medicine, cure ourselves and our patrons. Our search is for knowledge, but we're not sure where it is or what it looks like. We only have a lot of hearsay. But our collective mission is to find that knowledge and bring it from Arabic into our shared language, which is Latin. How are we going to do that? What do we have to do? Now, the technology being what it was at the time, when books are basically written on parchment and they're heavy and expensive and very valuable, we have to find the books. Some of the Arabic texts did have paper. At that time, Islamic culture had paper technology. Christian culture did not yet have paper. However, our problem is locating what we mean by the book. It's not easy. The best we will be able to find are versions of it, different copies, poor copies of it, mostly without diacritics, which makes understanding the Arabic rather difficult. Also, because these are expensive items and nobody's too sure, there are lots of pseudo-originals, but there are also pseudo-translations, because these books have come from Greek, through Syriac, to Arabic, and are waiting there to be brought into Latin. They are the results of multiple translations and multiple subterfuge. There are pseudo-originals and pseudo-translations. Lots of pseudo-Aristotle dates from this period. And this means that we have to establish the text and handle the various interpretations that come from the variants. To do that, we need a team because, let's face it, we are from Flanders, or Dalmatia, or England, or the Germanic states. I'm naming translators of the period. But we don't know Latin, and we're not, Arabic, and we're not going to learn it in a hurry. So we get advice from, first, Mossadems. These are Christians who were brought up under Islamic regimes. Lots of them, big community in Toledo, as it happens. Jews who have been able to move between one culture and the other. And then, because we need money for our project, so we worked with the church in the 12th century, for the crown in the 13th. Well, we need the Latinists who are going to write it down in Latin that is acceptable for the church. And so our teams generally have a Latinist there who is paid for by the church. And then also in other projects, the Quran was translated in 1142, 1143. The documents don't mention any Islamic informant, but later accounts do mention one. So we assume that there were Islamic informants as well who are written out of the accounts. But that's politics. How are we going to do it? Let's say we've got the text and we've got the team. Some of us know Arabic, others know Latin, but not everybody who knows Arabic knows Latin and vice versa. The general work procedure is going to be to discuss things. True, wax tablets had been used since Roman times, and were probably there. You could write down on a wax tablet something and then rub it out and write again, like a blackboard, if you like, or you could use a blackboard if it came to that. But a lot of it involves discussion, and probably discussion in Romance. Romance being Spanish, French, Aragonese, Majorcan, Catalan, Galician. It's just a dialect chain of Romance at that stage. And those discussions actually appear in the Latin text. There are elements of Romance within the Latin, especially in the notes and glosses. So we have not just accounts of how this happened, but also textual traces. We would discuss. Translation was there as something to be talked about. The technology, the core technology at the time, forced us into oral discussion. When you get paper in the 13th century, it gets a little trickier, because paper is cheaper to produce, and so you get different copies and revisions of written copies under Alfonso the Learned. But in the 12th century, it's spoken. In the 13th, the cheaper writing material makes revisions possible. What are we talking about here? Well, the Romance we don't know much about, but the Latin at the time is definitely a lingua franca. It is weakly standardized. There's no central authority or national authority to standardize it. Only the church has an interest in standardization of its discourses. The work into Arabic incorporates huge numbers of neologisms, not the least Arabic numerals at this stage, resulting in some quite wonderful interpretations and misinterpretations. I merely give you one or two, perhaps just one. In a book of a medicine book, Galen, we find the Latin translation warning you of the evils of the night plant. Watch out for the night plant. It will give you skin rashes, skin disease, Lambda noctis. It turns out that the night plant was a misreading of the Arabic banat, read as nabat. I don't know if it's 3 dots or 2 or something like that. Arabic people helped me with this later on. The Greek text was wonderful. It was telling you, watch out for the women of the night. They bring you syphilis. The the Latin text was talking about a plant for a basic misunderstanding, lack of diacritics. But when syphilis became a new disease imported from the New World, re-imported, the more virulent variety, people were able to pick up the translation and make the correction and use the knowledge. A similar mistake is Al-Kobi. I don't know what, I've looked up the Arabic for this, but it's not there. I don't know how I got it. This is Aristotle, who knew that the Earth had to be round, a sphere. Okay, Columbus didn't invent it, it's Aristotle, or Ptolemy. But one of the pieces of evidence that Aristotle gives is that there are, in the Latin text, there are alcobi at the 2 ends of the Earth, that is in India and the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, if you read back to the Greek text, it's elephantes, elephants. Somehow, the translators had no idea what an elephant was, but they copied out the closest literal thing they had there, and alchemy came to inhabit the 2 known ends of the Earth. watch out when you get to the end of the earth, the Alpha will come. Okay, it wasn't easy. Because of the difficulty of the task and the limited technologies available, the basic strategy was absolute literalism. Say what's there because you're not sure about it. But then, because of that, you add lots of notes, and the translations tend to have lots of notes, firstly to say what they think it might be, secondly as a recording of the discussion, it was agreed that, or there was disagreement about this point, and thirdly, to protect the translation team ideologically. For example, the Quran translation has copious documents about the evils of the life of the Prophet having many women. So, the translators protected themselves from being associated with the ideological conflict of the text. Now, there's lots more to say, but let's just pick up these few points about 12th century medieval translation practice in one particular place. I'm asking myself now, how similar could this be to the localization projects that we have currently? Let's say for huge documentation projects or websites or software. I propose that these things might be strangely common. For example, an unstable, what you call source text, but I've started to call start text, because there are other texts you're working on. The text is supposed to be there. These days you're working on something that's constantly being updated in fragments, and often you're working on fragments, particular chunks, only the updates. The point of departure is very unstable, as it was back then. Because of the complexity of contemporary projects, you need combined competencies. You need a team where people are expert in different fields, as you did back then. We tend to be working into an evolving lingua franca, which is international English, which is relatively unstandardized, exciting, dynamic, as indeed Latin was back then. And you get a movement of translation into this one central lingua franca, and then translations moving out from it. As we had then. In the 13th century, what was brought into Latin, 13, 14, 15, was then translated into the vernaculars. You get this movement of one to many, which I think is the key to most localization projects. The internationalized version going into each particular localized version. Throughout the entire medieval period, people believed very strongly in a hierarchy of languages. Some languages, I'm sorry, were closer to God. Languages of revelation, Hebrew, Greek, Latin because of the Bible, Arabic because the Quran has divine inspiration, and for some Sanskrit. And then you have the Latin in use by the church, and then the national vernaculars, and then the patois. And translation moves from the top downwards in the medieval scheme of things, developing the inferior languages as it goes. That hierarchy of languages is strangely familiar to people dealing with technological texts and localization projects in those fields today. With the consequence that work in the medieval period, as it is now, is not for a whole nation, not for everybody speaking French or everybody speaking Spanish or whatever. It's for those particular people who have that particular language to that particular degree of competence. They were working in terms of locales, as indeed we do these days. I'm not so sure, but I think lots of our technologies, the translation memory technologies especially, do push us towards a more literalist mode of translation than we had prior to that. But then the very name localization encourages us to believe that along with this literalism, there is cultural adaptation happening as well. The important thing is that these days, as in the medieval scheme of things, translation was not just one thing. There were these two possibilities and a kind of schism between the two of them. Not everything that happens these days happened then. And the one that really interests me, and I want to bring it up because of what's coming up, is that these days the kinds of texts susceptible to be localized tend not to have great linearity, in the sense that they are not written with a beginning, middle, and end, Aristotle. They are not read. You repair your car, you pick out the manual. Does anybody read a car repair manual or whatever? There are instructions from the beginning. No, you look for the bit that interests you and read that. That's the way the texts are written. That's the way they are translated. We've lost that linearity of the text. The medieval text still preserved that linearity, but I'm interested in what happened to it. I suggest that these days a lot of the linearity, beginning, middle, and end, has moved into audio-visual projects. Why am I interested in comparing localization with medieval translation practices? Because in between these two snapshots, there's this great big period of print culture, ladies and gentlemen. The printing press, the book, the fixed start text. Unlike what we have now, unlike what we had prior to it. The start text, the need to establish languages. The printers were the first to be involved in the standardization of orthography, and thereafter the standardization of languages, which were the national languages, because the printing press with its power had to be controlled. I believe in England, printing presses were allowed in Oxford, Cambridge, and London, so it could be controlled and standardized. The printing press brings in national vernaculars which ideologically have the same value. So when you get to Renaissance translation projects, even Leonardo Bruni will translate into Latin, but still insist Latin has the same value as Italian. I can translate into vernacular Italian just as well. It will be just as good. And the printing press sets up the technology for an ideology where languages are all national and in theory have the same value. So translation is no longer there to enrich the inferior language, it's there to bring across the information. Hence, the ideologies of equivalence, fidelity to some, but equivalence in the sense of same, on the same level of value. The Russian tradition calls this adequacy, with the same ideological import. And within this scheme of things, when it's language to language, same value, bringing the information across, it's assumed thereafter by Renaissance translators that one person can do it. You have the ideology of the individual translator. Etienne Dolet, in 1540, declared the translator has to know both the start and the target language perfectly. Not by chance, Etienne Dolet was a printer. Translation in this regime becomes therefore a relation between things rather than a place of discussion. Now, that print culture developed what I call the Western translation form, which is a modernist translation form. It's based on the notion of equivalence and the impertinence of quantitative differences. We assume a translation is longer because the original is longer. That form spread out in the late 19th century all over the world, along with the railways and the steamboats, which means along with steam technology. It also moved out with aspirations of democracy, universal education, things like this. It's not gratuitously dismissed, that notion of translation. However, the technologies we have today are now questioning that particular concept of translation, which I believe was closely associated with print technology. I still have 5 minutes left. Oh dear! Well, we can have a very long discussion. I have taken you, therefore, from 12th century Hispania, right up to a rough overview of what might be happening today. And there's this great big period in the middle where modernism, which really dates a sort of modernity, dates from the Renaissance, is being questioned. It's being questioned in ways that are not difficult to see. It's questioned because we have a return to the hierarchy of languages in the first place. It's questioned because we're using a centralized lingua franca, which is English. It's questioned because our societies cannot, therefore, not be presumed to be monolingual or controllable, as was the case through that long period of the ideologically monolingual nation state. The current challenge, I think, is not to revive or retain or extend that modernist Western translation form, that equivalence-based notion of translation. I think it's something else. Now, in my arguments here, I've jumped between a technology and the way translations are done. But it's fairly obvious, I think, that technologies don't have that sort of fatality. That if you go to other places in the Middle Ages, you will get different things being done with the same technology. But technology presents a range of possible decisions that can be made, possible directions you can go in. It's not condemning you to one, but it's limiting the range and it's making it easier to move in one direction than another. So I don't want to suggest a fatality, but I do want to suggest that the technologies push us more generally in one kind of direction. The direction that most interests me at the moment goes dead against that equivalence-based paradigm in as much as it's a relationship between equal things and excluded the human subject. In the first place, the mediator, the translator, never really appeared in all those diagrams that we learned about equivalence. It never really appeared in the relationship between languages. I think that some of the technologies we have today enable us to envisage a more humanized version of translation. This is particularly with respect to technologies that enable people to translate non-professionally, to produce a version without being a professional translator, and then to have professionals, such as us or the people we train, to come in and help them post-edit or edit or clean it up or give advice where necessary. Getting down and speaking with people about translation and doing that orally is one very good way of humanizing translation. We can envisage societies where a great number of people are actively engaged in translating rather than depending on a small minority of professionals to do it for them. The second exciting area for me is the rebirth of audiovisual communication, which we'll hear about later today, I hope. Especially with subtitling, which is cheap technology, accessible to everybody. Anybody, any translation student, any student at all, can go online and start doing subtitling and have fun doing it, and talk about it to support. So a whole lot of audiovisual culture becomes available in many, many languages very quickly, very cheaply. Those two, but there are only two examples, I hope you can find more. Those two directions enable me to envisage the current technologies as helping us to humanize translation processes, or I would rather say rehumanize them. My comparison with medieval practices isn't to say go back, it was so much better then. No, it wasn't. You had a bath once a year back then. People, perhaps some people, anyway. No, what I found in the years I spent doing that research on medieval translation was a genuine sense of excitement among the translators at their discovery of the difficulties that they went through and at the effects that they were able eventually to have on their cultures. That sense of involvement, much of which is through oral participation, that orality, the discussing of the translation, is something that is very valuable in itself. Perhaps not just in a translation class. Perhaps it's valuable across the board as a language learning or culture learning activity. In that sense of discovery of the new, what many of our cultures are still engaged in. Many thanks. Further questions? I'll see how far. I haven't planned.
Is it on?
We're on.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Very interesting, especially that sort of historical speed. I was wondering, you were talking about how technology introduces the possibility of humanizing translation. And I was wondering whether you could talk about that a little bit more, in particular in terms of balancing against other trends of technology, with removing the translator, with shifting away from the human element because of the various impacts through the shop.
Of course. It's a contradiction, isn't it? So humanizing technology. What was it, 20 years ago we started using translation memories and found that it was helpful, we could go faster, but that when we were told to just obey the 100% matches, that is, apply the glossary, don't touch anything else there, don't touch this, don't touch that, the initial reaction, quite justified, was, well, this is just donkey work. You know, we're there to follow the instructions, say yes or no, tick the boxes, and that is and remains, I think, a dehumanizing activity. It's the lone translator with this machine, and the machine tells you what to do. So that is a lot of the translation work that's being produced at the moment, and the translators, if they're intelligent, will not stay with that for very long. And didn't. They moved on to other things, project management in many cases. You know, looking for a style of work where they're at least talking to people and getting paid well for their time. So it's a threat, first. A lot of the technologies that there are fundamentally dehumanizing. The introduction of machine translation along with the translation memories these days is not particularly healthy. When we do some research on, my Callister Scherer is doing research on metadata in the translation memories and machine translation feeds. The idea is that if you tell people where this suggestion comes from, give them ideas about who did it and why, make it clear that it's a human product, because they're all human products after all, this might help. This might help position the translator in a realm where he or she is working on the suggestions made by other people there. And it's a kind of virtual conversation, which sounds great, but I can tell you in theory, in practice, do the numbers, the more metadata that's presented, the slower the translator goes, the less money they earn, and the quality of their product does not increase to any significant extent. So that kind of humanization remains a problem. I'm therefore looking to to more interesting things that are outside the narrow range of what we've been teaching as professional translation. One of them is this. Work with volunteers, work with area experts, people who know more about this topic than we do, and doing that in a very interactive way, helping people rather than just working on texts. And then the audiovisual, which opens up a lot of similar opportunities working with non-professionals. So I get the drift of your question. The big threat is that the technologies are very dehumanizing, and the challenge is for us to make them more humanizing.
Thanks for that. Actually, it's fascinating. Can I ask you a question about humanization as a process? Because it's humanization which is doubled by democratization and linked then to deprofessionalization. And in terms of the historicization of the process, I suppose that if you look at the different niches you're focusing on, that's the big difference. And the way you're describing 12th century Hispania, it's very much a restricted, almost elite activity. Whereas what we're looking at now with the current challenges is something entirely different. And I'd just be interested to hear your reflection on that divergence between contexts.
It was necessarily an elite activity, of course, because not many people could write that. That's a given. What did you line up there? You lined up democratization with deprofessionalization. Yeah, this is a debate that we've had in the translation studies community over the past years. It's about our traditional alliance with the professionals. People could write that translation theory is only justified if it helps professional translators, for example. That would be the argument that was there, or even the empirical work we've done, comparing professionals with novices, so we could find out how good the professionals are. That's what, 30 years of research. The academic community has had this historical alliance with professionals, that is, people who earn money. That's worked quite well, although the professionals never liked us much as it went along. However, it certainly was there. I'm starting to question that. I'm questioning whether it's good for our society to have this small, well-paid group that does all the translation work. And I'm seeing that we're no longer there. That lots of actual translating, at whatever level, is happening across society. That anybody can pick up and do some Google Translate. And life is going to be a lot better if we can get the message out there that you have to post-edit it, that you can't use it raw, that some work has to be done on it. I think as trainers in the academy, that should become our social mission, to address that wider range of activity that's actually happening there, and help the professionals reposition themselves, or think about how that can be done at the same time. So, democratization, if that means democratization, if that means addressing a wider social problem and inviting more involvement in this task, more discovery and more learning, then I think we're doing even better than the medieval elites.
If I may, I thought your idea of the start text rather than source text was very, very interesting, and I really like it because it dissolves that potentially hierarchical relationship. But you then talked about translation from one to many, translation from one text into a pivot language, and then further translations from that language into a whole range of other languages. And so, if you're talking about this kind of translation, which one is the source text?
Yeah.
Sorry, the start text. Is it the translation from the first text into the pivot language, or when you then have translation from the pivot language into other languages, is the pivot language text And then I started to think, with the idea around professionalization and campaign, in popular literary translation, so for example in crime fiction, what is happening to some extent is that translations come from other languages into English. English functions as a third language, and from there they are then translated as some kind of bestsellers, maybe public economy, are translated into other languages, but the translator who originally translated into English, not credited, does not get any money for it. So I'm wondering whether that text here, perhaps also invisibilizes later. Just the sort of ideas that I've.
Okay, for the first question. Okay, I use start text just because when we work with translation memories and MT feeds, you are working with our text here, our text here, our text here. So that's a starting position, but you're working on with other texts as well. So source was never an appropriate term in any case. Every text is a translation by text. What's happened to it in localization projects? I presume you work on a program called Microsoft Word. Perhaps Word 2011 or 13 or something. Have you ever seen Word version 1? You know, the start text, the original, would be Word 1. I started using Word, I think, in 1983. I don't think it was Word 1 then, it was 1.3. Anyway, the start has disappeared. The texts we're working from are a constant result of constant revisions and updates. So we're working from this internationalized version, which is put together precisely in order for localization to achieve. So the start isn't that important. It can't function as a start for a particular operation. And that's the sense in which I use the start. For this operation, that's the starting point, without making any other ideological separations. As for crediting the translation for the translator for indirect translations, that's a copyright problem, and we should fix it up, I suggest. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce the second speaker, Minako O'Hagan from Dublin City University. Minako researches and teaches translation technology, and she has been involved in national and international projects in translation technology, with the supervision of a number of PhD students in translation technology again. She has published extensively in the field of translation technology, and her latest book with John Benjamin is Game Localization, Translating for the Global Digital Entertainment, in collaboration with Carmen Mangiron. But today she is going to talk about something which I thought was always fun, training translators, but she is into gamifying translation training. So she's talking about serious fun. Minako, do you want to come over here, or do you have it? I'm also reminded that there are some virtual participants to the conference, and for their benefit, I'm just saying that this session starts now and finishes at 11:40, and then we have a break at 11:40 until 12. We start again at 12:30 in the same room. I'm also asked to ask the people who ask questions to stand up so that they can appear more clearly on the screen, and to speak clearly into the microphone, please. And I think that's about all. Thank you very much. So over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. So today I'm going to talk about, picking up from Anthony's last message, excitement, involvement, and discovery in transition teaching. Now, gamification has got a bit of hype about it, and I'm going to just talk to you about my take on this. And as for serious fun, you'll find out what it is. So I think this symposium is very timely, as we all know. A transition in the digital age and pedagogy and current practices, addressing really how we can maximize student and employability. So this is a concern to students themselves, but also for teachers' point of view, because we want to see them really able to use their skills that they learn. And what's the role of current digital technology? Is it really dehumanizing, or is it really humanizing in some ways? So my response to the theme is emotion. Today I'm going to talk a lot about emotion. And as we all know, emotion is somewhat neglected in research. Too much emotion is no good, but too little emotion is no good either. Yeah. So how can we improve students' engagement in learning? By using technology. And I'm going to share a very, very modest step towards gamifying. I haven't quite gamified my teaching yet. So I want to share, this is my disclaimer, I want to share the process towards it. So just key concepts first. First of all, affective learning. I'm particularly taking the interpretation of this based on MIT Media Lab researchers. Rosalind Picard is a leading researcher in the field of affective computing. And this is a computer modeling of affect, emotions. And this kind of research is really shedding light onto, understanding of emotion. There are so many definitions of emotion, over 100 definitions. And it's very, very slippery concept to really clearly define, and especially depending on different perspectives, it can be defined, in different ways. But they're generally associated with things like emotion, attention, and motivation. Here I'm talking about the definition of affect. But currently there's no empirically validated theory of emotion to address specifically its role in learning. And that's what some of these groups of people who are working in the field of affective learning from affective computing is trying to do, by doing it by developing system to try to measure emotion and try to implement that in learning environment. And another key concept is gamification. So there's a bit of hype about gamification. So one of my research fields is video game monetization. And I don't necessarily agree with everyone's understanding of gamification. But generally speaking, gamification as a term is used to mean use of game mechanics for things other than pure entertainment, so for learning. And it's been done already. For example, US military has been using games for training soldiers, etc. And increasingly, other Fortune 100 companies have been using gamification because of its ability to increase engagement of learners and involvement and excitement in learning. And I really do like the concepts that James G talks about. James G is a very prominent scholar in a number of fields, in linguistics, literacy, and very much in game studies as well. And he and Elizabeth Hayes talks about good games being associated with passionate affinity spaces. and how can we create such passion affinity spaces as learning space is the theme of my talk today. So just to really structure my talk, because all these things I've been thinking about it for the last while. So in order to be able to make sense to you, I tried to kind of cluster ideas together in such a way. So first of all, I'm really very, very interested in technologization of translation in many different ways. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, my research in that area. And also I'm going to talk about digital technology and its role in teaching and learning environments. Because my university, Dublin City University, has been investing, like most other universities, into this digital learning and things like MOOCs. We don't know where things are going exactly. So that's something I'm going to talk about too. And my very, very modest step was gamifying my teaching. So I just show you some examples of some things that I've done as a mini experiments. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about reflections and future tasks. So this is a kind of diagrammic form of what I'm going to talk about today, my thinking. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to talk about my research, which led me to think in terms of affect, importance of affect. Now, previous speaker, Anthony, already talked about this, really highly engaged volunteers and fans doing translation. So I want to just talk a little bit about that. And then next I want to talk about my work in video game localization, particularly focusing on users of localized games and their perception of translation. And on the other side, I want to talk about digital technology and its role in teaching and learning, particularly digital scholarship. And I want to refer to a particular project that I was involved in last year. And finally, affective learning and gamification. Again, this was something that I worked on for funding bid. And then I will discuss some examples of implementing some of these ideas into my own teaching of technology-oriented modules. And finally, a bit of reflection. So first of all, translation and affect. It became increasingly clear to me that these volunteer translators, this is very much a democratization of technology. Now, anybody and anyone can feel, rightly or wrongly, they can translate. And these people are extremely engaged into the task and excited about it. And also, similarly, when players, gamers play games, they're absolutely highly engaged. But this study that I've conducted on framed according to so-called PX, player experience, showed somewhat interesting pictures. So I'll talk about that. And also digital learning environments. I wanted to know students' perception and use of academic ebooks. I mean, after all, textbooks is the main learning, teaching resources at the moment. But how are they taking this new digitized version of this? So we conducted a campus-wide survey. So I will share some of the results from that. And then teaching practices, that how I started to kind of apply this idea of gamification in reference to use of reflective diary and visualization of assessment results. So first of all, scenario one, this translation as affinity spaces. So already some of you are aware that these new breed of translators who are working outside of official, professional practices, hand translators do translation of Japanese anime or any sort of audiovisual materials and put their translations up on YouTube or some file sharing environment so people can share. And I did a case study following one particular fan translator, and I was absolutely astonished about two things. Well, first of all, engagement is absolutely amazing, and that's clearly because they are doing something they are really interested in. So very much this affinity spaces they're working in. Another thing I really noted, in this case, this was an Irish student doing fan translation of Japanese anime. He was studying Japanese in my university, but his learning pace was just so much faster than the rest of the class. He was like having an accelerated learning, and that was coming from his practice of doing fan translation, because they get loads of feedback and they're working in really kind of a situated environment. And I could really see the merit of this. So I wanted to really exploit this kind of, affinity spaces. And the similar thing about translation crowdsourcing. Just recently, one of my PhD students finished her PhD on focusing on motivation of Facebook translators. So Facebook used this crowdsourcing form to do their website, to localize their website. And it's really interesting here, the concept I'm using is from Clay Shirky, cognitive surplus. So he's a media scholar, and he talks about how in olden days, after day's work, people used to plonk themselves in front of TV. We may still do it today, but the difference is today, a larger proportion of population are plonking themselves in front of social media and doing maybe, crowdsourcing translation or doing some kind of voluntary work. So the use of cognitive surplus is now very different and much more engaging, into some activities rather than being passive, sitting passively. So again, this is set up by the technology, this two-way communication, and made it relatively easy for people to subtitle and distribute that material. I mean, legality is something different, but technology is very much promoting this kind of activity. My next scenario, so this comes from my work in video game localization. And particularly, I was really struck by this widespread anecdotal evidence that many gamers find localized games lackluster, afterthought, just something is missing. And here I'm not talking about blatant translation errors or localization errors, but something is missing. And it's very difficult to find out what that something is. So what I did was I set up this experiment using originally English language game called Plants vs. Zombies. Has any of you played? No! Do! It's very interesting. Recommend it. So I used Plants vs. Zombies original English version and localized versions into Japanese and German, and I got native speaker players to play, and it took absolutely all possible measurements from them. So here we use mixed methods approach and very much into this psychophysiological measurements. This was inspired by sort of emotion engineering, which is a very interesting area of study, who have been using this kind of measurement, and of which we used eye tracking, galvanic skin response, that's kind of measuring sweat level, to check the arousal, and heart rates, facial expressions, autonomous utterances, and we interviewed them after. And this really resulted in a very, very interesting findings. So basically what we found was that we gave a certain limited amount of time for our subjects to play the game. And the people who really able to progress through the game and ended up with very highest level, some of them said to us, no, their playing and gameplay experience wasn't very good one. They weren't really engaged, wasn't very interesting. By comparison, those people who really struggled and had to repeat the same level more than twice, because in order to be able to progress the level, you need to finish one prior level. And they really said to us, they really enjoy themselves. So this user experience is not a simple thing as just looking at the results, but the process is very, very important. So we looked at different theoretical frameworks. And Csikszentmihalyi is a very well-known Hungarian psychologist who came up with this flow theory. So basically his theory is that in order to keep people engaged and let them do optimum performance, you need to keep them, it's this narrow zone of boredom and anxiety. And that was very much showing in our experiment. And as in terms for translation quality, when players are enjoying themselves, they hardly notice poor translation. So our conclusion was, for certain types of games, really, probably you don't need to get the top quality, translation. Gamers, players don't necessarily notice it. It's quite interesting. I mean, I realize this is a very controversial thing to say, but as far as this research was concerned, that was one of the interesting findings. So again, we're trying to kind of interpret the results from this experiment. And we used this concept developed by Nicole Lazaro. She is a game developer and also researcher, classifying different types of emotions involved in video game playing. And she came up with what she calls 4 keys of fun, different types of fun. So applying her scheme here, our results show that people in our experiment who had positive player experience had either hard fun, which very much relates to overcoming challenges and winning and meeting goals, or even serious fun. And serious fun means really the joy of working out the puzzle and learning process, having to repeat the same level again and again. But somehow by doing that, they gain a lot of fun from that, and also a fun of completing finally. And interestingly, this easy fun, not many people showed really positive player experience coming from this easy fun. So I thought we could really implement that in our teaching. So I'm going to skip this slide and go to the next one. So I'm now changing the gear, talking about teaching and learning in digital environment. So as I mentioned before, I was involved in a very small-scale project in our university to really kind of take the temperature of the people's current use and perception of so-called academic ebooks. Because our library stocks many ebooks. Indeed, it was quite interesting. According to this survey, which involved a little bit over 500 people, only 60% of all respondents, which included staff members, postgrads, undergrads, actually were using ebooks. And some of the reasons is quite interesting. They don't know how to access it, even though the catalog shows it, and it was quite interesting, revealing. And the next question was also very interesting. When both print and ebooks are available, a highest proportion of undergraduate students said they prefer print books. Was quite interesting. And by comparison, the same undergraduate students said that the most used device to access ebooks was smartphones. And increasingly in my office, I don't know what your experience is, more and more students just bring in no notebooks, just bring in tiny little smartphone and show me their assignment on it. And I need magnifying glass. And so just mobile phone use is phenomenal, as we already know. So this is something we wanted to also measure in this survey, was the future of academic ebooks. And we wanted to know what features people want in ideal academic books. And as you can see here, across the 3 groups, undergrad, postgrad, and staff members, the most wanted function is search tool. And of course, Control F is a golden thing for students to do. Then they can zoom in a particular keyword. And also, a lot of people interestingly said ability to increase font size. So, as I'm getting older, my eyesight's getting poor, but it applies to everyone. But that wasn't the reason. The reason why people selected this was when you see graphs and charts with ebooks, for certain ebooks, you can enlarge them and see them in detail. So that's what students are talking about. So this survey showed a lot of interesting things. And by the way, we threw in this automatic translation tool. The most respondents of among the 3 groups, the undergrad students group showed most interest in this particular functionality. As a second tier study of the same e-learning, academic ebook project, we also bought Amazon's latest Kindle. It's called Kindle Paperwhite. Does anybody use it? It's wonderful, isn't it? Yes, very easy to use it. So we bought 6 units of Kindle Paperwhite and just chose 6 students to be our guinea pigs and got them to test out certain functionalities. Now, interesting thing here is that everyone found that dictionary functionality is fantastic, because if you are in Wi-Fi zone, all you need to do in the text is just highlight with your finger, and then the dictionary is linked already. Well, interestingly, I've tested a number of books that I have on Kindle with dictionary, and OED often doesn't have all the words, but Wikipedia, every time they have it. So, of course, reliability you need to be aware, but it was quite interesting. But one of the most things that we're interested in this study was use of shared notes. So one of the things you're supposed to be able to do with Kindle Paperwhite is to share your notes that you make on your Kindle in Facebook. Well, I'm not sure about this wisdom of using Facebook in academic context, but it was there, so we tested it, and everyone basically hated it because it really wasn't properly set up, and they couldn't really link up properly, and many of them actually commented that the fact that they don't want to do academic-related things in Facebook was quite interesting. And also we got them to try translation tool, automatic translation tool attached to it. That's a Microsoft Bing, and they had very poor opinion of it. And this is the most interesting thing to me. So we got them to basically read 3 sets of chapter length chapters, 3 different chapters, and basically review each chapter by highlighting 3 key points. And we collected what parts students highlighted on Kindle. And so here, of course, you can't see my green notes, but these highlights show by 2 different people, and they highlighted very similar places, etc. We're still kind of analyzing the results from this study, so I can't tell you much more. But these new, well, Kindle is not so new. These tools really give you some ideas about what you could do, and particularly I'm interested in this social side of dimensions that you can explore with these devices. Now, I wonder if you can see this gray 108 highlighters. Can you see that on screen? Yeah. So when you buy brand new Kindle book, sometimes you see something like this, and that means that people who have bought the same book had highlighted that particular bit. So it's a little bit like, in olden days, buying second-hand books. You see the previous owner's markups, and they're doing that digitally. It's really fascinating, and I really want to work out the way we use this in teaching. So that's my study. That's the bit about academic ebook. So now on to my practice towards gamifying my teaching. So of course, reflective diary is hardly new, but I decided especially to understand the process of learning, and particularly emotional side of learning technology. So I implemented this reflective diary assignment. So after each week's lecture, student had to submit this up to 350 words, 1-page diary. So it's not a big thing, but they have to be attending a lecture to be able to do this. So I just made a very simple template. So first thing, they need to name or rename the theme of the lecture according to their interests, not lecturer's interests. So I have a theme each week, but I wanted to name them according to their interests. Then, second part was to comment on anything new they learned. And the third part was a personal reaction. So things like what they liked and what they didn't like, and a particular book they might have read as a result of the lecture. And I was wondering how this goes. And interestingly, as the week goes by, more and more students really started to show a real engagement into this. So what I then decided to do was, after each week, of course, I read all these diaries, and so in this particular case, 2 modules were involved. One was undergraduate translation technology module, and the other one was postgraduate module. And the same results. More and more students started to really show the engagement. And what I was particularly doing was that after the following week, the beginning of the lecture, I would pick up some interesting insights from the diary and share with the class. That gradually caught on. And these are some of the feedback that I got from students. So I think the diary helped with focusing in class. It forced you to reflect on what you thought was the most interesting that day and expand on it. I liked how the interesting comments in the diaries, wrong place, were discussed in the following class. And the other one said, I found it very useful in gathering my thoughts every week, and I enjoyed its free-form nature. It allowed me to delve a little deeper into the concepts that interested me personally. I also found the lecturers' weekly summaries of other classmates' reflections offered interesting insights into other aspects of the class content that could be explored. So I was really chuffed by this mini experiment. So I'm going to keep doing this, and I found it really interesting for me. Now, visualization of this assessment. This is again something very, very modest. I'm sure some of you are doing much more advanced stuff. But I decided to use this particular function called rubric, which is available in all kinds of virtual learning environments. And we use Moodle. And I decided to use this particular functionality applied to in-lab tests. So coming back to this gamification concept, one of the things that games do is instant feedback. So gamers, players know where they're at with the game. And of course, with us teaching, we can't give them instant, feedback. I want to really shorten the lead time for the assessment to be ready, but it's not always possible. So this is one way of kind of systematizing and trying to give them more quicker, shorter feedback, so more formative feedback. And also the other one I did was, this is with summative assessment feedback. I decided to use a radar chart so that visually students can see what aspects are they weak on and which aspects they're strong. So this is what rubric looks like. So the first column shows the category of grading. So source text formatting reproduced, target text file submitted, TM file submitted, translation memory file submitted, etc. And so students can clearly see what they didn't do right or what they're a bit short of, etc. And this is what a radar chart looks like. So again, nothing revolutionary, but this is just purely visualizing it, because more and more this education information management system is making this kind of information available readily, and they really try to do visualization like this. By the way, this was a whole class, and obviously this is not very useful type of graph at all. So one has to know what one wants to highlight and what one wants to kind of show to the student. Now, I don't know if you can work out what this screenshot may be about. This is about my photocopier usage analytic, because our university is doing a lot of analytic, and even can do that with one's use of photocopying. Now, just to save my face, this also includes my PhD students' use of photocopier. So 395 pages since 2011 was not just me. But the most interesting statistics here to me is this environmental impact. Showing trees how badly my use of photocopying is affecting, and carbon and energy, etc. So I think when we're presenting data, we can do it in a slightly more interesting way, and also really highlight some aspects that be relevant and interest to the recipient. So gamification and data. So more and more, as I said, data becoming available on virtual learning environment and education information management systems of learner data. But really, what kind of data would be motivating for students? and also what kind of data will be helpful for teachers. And more, there's a discussion, and when you particularly look at MOOCs literature, people talk about personalization of learning. And at this stage, mostly they're talking about use of data and individual students' data. But I think we have to be very cautious about just becoming too cozy about just showing statistics. Statistics can only be useful if that's relevant kind of data, and so we need to think about that. So where to from here? I think I'll continue with my search with this affect, especially in relation to motivation, engagement, and creativity. We don't want to have the situation where when students play games, they are powered up, and when they come to school, they power down. We want to keep that power continuously up and even higher in school. And so what do we do for future-proofing? So Anthony talks about really learners have to be prepared to learn in this dynamic environment. And that's very much true. And with really discovery of joy of learning, I think we can do that. People will be prepared to do this. So in digital learning environments, for me, these are the key issues for me. So first of all these new learning systems are becoming available. But to me, I want to use them to make learning fun, and especially serious fun. And I want to really make good use of data and analytics to make learning fun. And of course, MOOCs is really on everybody's mind. And I think MOOCs is something which is really very much developing. And the current form is not at all the end, finished product. So I want to be part of the picture to contribute to good direction of the future learning. And one of the things that I'm doing towards that is involvement in a project to develop serious games. Mind you, we haven't got the funding yet, so we're yet to find out. But this is very much intended to really focus on this affect in learning. Thank you. Of course, we can always lead by example. So we can be very, really involved, passionate about our research, teaching, and yeah. So that's a starting point, to really encourage students to be equally passionate and engaged. In terms of employers' wish, what we're experiencing, this is hearing from students who interviewed by Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, said that they often ask about their most proud projects that they've done, and what was the topic of their dissertation. So I think they're really trying to kind of put together, how passionately students did and can talk about it, etc. Sorry, it's not possible to answer your question fully. It's such a, it takes a few days to discuss this. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very well-researched talk. It was very, very fascinating. I just was wondering what your experience was regarding the engagement of students. I haven't done quite so much as you have done, but I've very much tried to involve students in my classes with technology, and it works very well individually. But I find very difficult to get them going on a networking level. And I was wondering, as you've talked a lot about individual engagement, in my experience it's got worse in the last few years because students are very busy, needing to work outside, and they don't actually find the time to network together in spite of Facebook pages, wikis, Moodle, and all these things. I was wondering what your experience had been in your study on that level.
It's very interesting. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if this microphone is on. Yeah. Yes, I share your concern. Well, interestingly, what's been happening in the last few years is some students every year in our group, there are one or two what we call techne mentors. Do you know the term? The techne mentors. So these are the kids who are students who really are very knowledgeable about some aspects of technology, for example, and they take on the role of being tutor to other students who are less, familiar with technology. And I very much always make sure that encourage that sort of behavior, and certain employers, like G company, they certainly appreciate that sort of attitude. And so I make sure I just mention this sort of helping out classmates, and then gradually that kind of approach spreads. So rather than competing against each other, they start to kind of try to help each other. And the year that we had a number of techno mentors, everybody did so much better than the year where everybody was so competitive about it. But it's very, I know, I understand exactly where you're coming from. It's group dynamics is a very tricky issue. Yeah, sorry, it's again half-baked answer to that.
Just speak. Hello. Maybe we should call them techno ambassadors just to go with the flow. First, a request. Every person who asks a question to name who they are and they're from. So I'm Svetlana Karsten from the University of Leeds. I have a very, very boring question to you. And perhaps that wasn't the subject of your research, but you did the survey of using academic ebook. So you gave statistics. To what purpose? What does it tell us? If you probably have not looked at it, but the fact that undergraduates use is lower than staff or postgraduates. But what does it tell us? What do we learn from that?
Okay. Yeah. Not at all boring. Very, very good question. So the purpose of the survey was, as I said, this was actually, I failed to mention, project with the library. So we wanted to understand the current use of ebooks and perception of this, digitization of technology, text, etc. So interesting thing about it was that, so when they are asked, undergrads said they really prefer ebooks, but at the same time, one of their wish list item was that all books listed under reading list to be available as ebook. So that was a slightly interesting contradiction in a way, but of course it's to do with competition. When students leave reading their reading list books until the last minute, then of course they are not there anymore. So by the time they get to it, too late. So that was their wish list. But also from libraries' point of view, they were really staggered to hear that people didn't know how to access it, because they thought it was quite clear and a simple click on the link, etc. So we discovered those kind of reality of, people's ability to really access these things. And interestingly, we really didn't have much idea how people are finding ebooks. And a lot of the respondents said that really currently ebooks are pure digitized text from the print book. And there's no difference in terms of design. And when we probe further, yes, many of them wished they would exploit more the things afforded by digital technology, more kind of interactive aspects, etc., maybe visualization, etc. So that was at least the first part of survey part of the research. But the second part was more interesting about actually comparing the reading pattern of students using Kindle and also reading text on computer screen, and also compared to reading on book. And just mundane things, like some students said that when you try to make notes when you're reading print books, you have to hold open the page on one hand, then write on the other. It's kind of ergonomically tricky. Two, some students said, well, they look at screens such long hours these days that reading text PDF file on computer screen was just their eyes are watering. So all these minute details came up, but everyone said that because Kindle is linked automatically to dictionary, their dictionary lookup behavior improved, because usually they wouldn't look up dictionaries even if they have words they don't know, but it's there. All you need to do is just use finger to highlight, then it's there. So something like that, we could really link to our teaching, yeah. So. Okay, there are so many elements into your question, as usual, so I have to unpack, maybe answer one or two, and list over coffee. Well, first of all, I have to make it clear when I said perhaps good translation is not needed for certain games. It's purely I was talking about our research results from this particular game that people didn't even stop and critique very highly literal translation, in this case done for Japanese version of Plants vs. Zombies. And it didn't certainly hinder them. The worst case of bad poor translation is so-called the actually translation, bad translation stops them from able to progress the game. Yeah, so that's a plot stopper. But this case, when I said poor translation, it's just basically very literal rendition, and transliteration was used a lot, but people hardly noticed it. Yeah, and in terms of manual, in terms of games, interestingly, as I think Anthony said, nobody reads manual from from page 1 to the end, and especially so with the gamers, and more with our students also. When they need to know something, even if manual is there, they just go to Google. So they don't use manual at all. So for games now, they're ditching print manuals and instead they're actually incorporating in-game tutorials and showing how to do it. So it's a bit like our equivalent of seeing things done in YouTube, how to use translation memory in YouTube, right? So it's many ways a very interesting thing, and crowdsourcing is yet a different thing altogether. So I need to comment on that some other time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe, hopefully, this anyway, the copy there and Steve as well. Please don't forget to sign up for the parallel session. Thank you.